Data Storytellers. Today, I'm here with Mark Stange-Tregear, who's the Vice President of Analytics at Rakuten Rewards. Great to have you with us.
Good morning. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. Excited for our conversation, speaking with a seasoned analytics leader, and excited to get into all the data stories you've been telling throughout your career and planning to tell as well. So just to start with, tell us a bit about this background, what your journey, how you became the VP Analytics for Rakuten Rewards.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this wasn't necessarily a plan. I was a scientist who moved into philosophy in college, and then sort of was looking around, seeing what I wanted to do. I actually started in nonprofit legal publishing. From there, I sort of took up some of the marketing work there. I had a numbers background, so once I was in the marketing space, I started working on marketing analytics and segmentation. I sort of just drifted into it, and from there, I went to work for a company called Worldwinner around Boston for a couple of years, where I was working on marketing analytics and also got into some product analytics and product planning there. After that, I moved into Silicon Valley and took a job as the senior analyst at what was a very small startup at the time called My New Place, which was in the apartment listing business. We sold that company to a large apartment software provider called RealPage, and I worked with RealPage for a couple of years, doing a whole raft of different analytics, everything at that point from product and marketing analytics, but also through sales, financial stuff, pretty much anything that came up. And then a couple of guys that I'd worked with at My New Place had moved over to a company that was called Ebates at the time, another smallish startup, that I suggested that I may want to come and work with Ebates and do some business intelligence and data analytics there. And I have been with that company ever since. Ebates was acquired in 2015 by Rakuten, which, if you don't know, is a huge, huge Japanese sort of like equivalent. And I'm now, gradually worked my way up. We've got a team of analysts. Data science now reports into me as well. I run a combined group that focuses on business intelligence, enterprise analytics, enterprise data science, and providing a data platform for a couple of thousand people at this point, with a team of about 70 in total. And that's me. Done a whole lot of analytics and storytelling with data along the way in a raft of different kind of scenarios and situations.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into those two today. You mentioned that this wasn't the original plan, so to speak, but now you've been in this space for so long, there must be something that you like about it. What do you like most about working in the analytics space?
Yeah, I think that I do like answering problems, and I like learning. I spent a lot of time in academia. I really enjoyed my time there. And what I like about analytics is it's a form of very logical thinking, but about real tangible problems. I can do theory if pushed to it, but if you get right down to it, I'm more of a practical problem solver, but I like to approach things in a logical and a data focused way. So it's a very nice synergy for me personally, where I can use data, I can apply kind of logical thinking to make some real world kind of impact and drive real world decisions. I don't know. It's a good personality fit, shall we say?
Yeah, and one thing that really stood out to me on your profile is that you talk about putting data to work, is a phrase you use there, which is really interesting, because a lot of people and a lot of organizations, they're looking for this really, really high quality and by extension, very expensive data analytics talent. But what they struggle with is actually turning those into extracting real business value, right? So, you mentioned that you have this practical problem solving approach. What kind of like tenets would you have in terms of turning someone from just a really strong theoretical data leader to a practical problem solver?
Yeah, I think that we emphasize and have done for years stakeholder engagement, collaboration. So within my organization, and this is true for the data scientists as much as the analysts, we don't have pure managers. We don't have people purely working on pipelines or purely doing report writing. Every single member of my team, no matter how senior, is deliberately and explicitly aligned with certain business stakeholders, stakeholders, finance stakeholders who they work in a collaborative way with. They're genuinely there to provide certainly support, but also strategic input. Certainly for the more senior members of the team, the expectation is that they're contributing to sales, to marketing, to finance, right, from a strategic and forward-looking point of view, and helping them really solve the problems. So I think in a lot of organizations, you get this sort of split where it's on the, let's say, the senior manager of sales for the California region to improve sales. In our situation, that is as much the problem for the manager of analytics as it is for that head of sales. So we don't have the situation where there's a business need and they have to come and sort of request resources, or I have to try and say, you go and help with sales today. It's, that's just the way we operate. We operate as a branch of the individual business and product organizations. I don't think that's too dissimilar to how some organizations work, and that's why, or some other organizations work, I think, and that's why a lot of organizations have their own sales analytics team or their own marketing analytics team. The tricky thing with that is it can, and I've worked within those organizations, and unless you're very, very big, very, very big, it is difficult to get a critical mass within those business functions. Like where, if you have a strong senior analyst, is there a manager position for them within the sales analytics branch? If you're a very large company, then yeah, probably, right? Maybe you can go all the way up to a VP or, within that branch. I think for most organizations, though, there isn't that kind of career opportunity. There isn't that kind of peer or mentorship available beyond one or two tiers. And I would say that a very high percentage of my team came to us and have stayed with us because they've been sort of bottlenecked in their career path and their advancement and their learning and their mentorship and their ability to really progress their skill sets because of the organizational structure. And what we have successfully managed to do over the years is have that tight bond with the business, but still provide that kind of strong disciplinary group and opportunities for advancement within analytics and data science.
Yeah, you brought up a ton of really interesting questions there, which I want to delve into. You mentioned like asking good questions, like, okay, as a data leader, what business problem can I solve? And then the advantages of proactivity versus reactivity and how that can get buy-in. One thing I really want to touch on is the last piece you said, though, which is the engagement. So this is what I call the army problem, because every army in the world globally, or every army in the West anyway, they put a lot of their emphasis on recruitment numbers, getting people through the system, getting them into the organization. But I think what a lot of people, and especially the army, they forget is about retention, which is what you were talking about, keeping talent there. So how do you, or what are some of the considerations that you would have when you're towing the line between keeping people happy and but at the same time providing that business value and providing themselves as an asset to the business?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a really interesting mix, and especially with smaller companies, you always risk coming up against that problem where, the person's too valuable in the position they're in to move them, but then they get frustrated and leave. And, I've worked within organizations that have struggled with that. I've worked within organizations that have kind of the analytics staff reporting into effectively non-analysts, right? They don't really have the senior path. They don't really have the people either from an analytics or a data science point of view that, they can look to and say, oh, that's where I could be in a couple of years' time. And that can be, I mean, I'll just speak personally, that was a very frustrating experience. It's very difficult. You don't have someone you can go to learn from necessarily, or you have to do all of the work on your own and find the lessons you can learn. So since I joined eBay, this has been a very deliberate long-term line of thinking, which is, no, let's build an analytics organization which offers a career path, which offers skills development that allows people to grow in their role, but also allows a degree of flexibility. So if you look across my team today, I would say somewhere around at least 30% of the people in the team today, and it's probably more like 40% actually, when they started with the team, they started in a different discipline. And either they have moved horizontally, or they've taken additional responsibilities and a large number of the managers and the directors and so on within my team are internal promotions, and many of whom have also shifted. And so I've been with Ebates for 9 years now. I've got a substantial number of my team that, they've been with me 7-8 years. They're a couple of steps through the career path. They're moving up through the ladder. And I've got several people who've done that after shifting focus. They were a sales analyst and now they're working in product analytics, or they did have a background in sort of marketing analytics and the kind of the Google analytics space. And now they're doing, whatever it is, very detailed product analytics or, financial work. And we've been able to do that because of the team structure and as a result, I think we've experienced much lower churn numbers than you would typically expect within an analytics group.
Awesome stuff. So when you're looking at building this team and then by in turn building this analytical culture within Rakuten and before Ebates, what kind of are the qualities of leaders you look for who inspire this real change and are successful at driving this mantra that you guys have?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation for Ebates in particular, because I've had the benefit. There's been 2 CEOs since I started working at Ebates, both of whom came from a data services background, and both of whom were extremely data focused. So that experience that some people have, where there has been, where you have to go in and you have to try and sell the value of data to the organization, is not something I've had to deal with with my CEOs. Other people around the organization, sure, and as we've done acquisitions and so on, that has come up, and we've had to work through the mentality. But I've been lucky enough to always have a good degree of executive sponsorship. In fact, I would say our current CEO is probably still one of the most knowledgeable people about the data warehouses and Tableau, one of the best Tableau report builders we have in the organization, which is kind of astonishing. It does mean that the standards were set pretty high, because I can't hide anything from him, which is, put a spotlight, put a good one on us over the years, and the expectations have been very high, but executive sponsorship hasn't been too much of an issue. So that hasn't been too much of a struggle. Where it's become interesting is trying to find the range of different ways that you have to work with different leaders and different stakeholders around the company. If I'm talking with, someone who's got maybe a product manager with a strong data background, that's a very different conversation than a leader of sales who's really who's rightly focused on hitting the quota for the year, right? You do not want them to be interacting with sales with data in the same way. You do not want, it's a very different environment, and you really need to meet them where they're at. I mean, we sometimes go back to the old adage of, our job is to get the right data to the right people in the right way and at the right time. And the right way can mean very different things. I think increasingly over the years, we've also added, and to make sure that they are seeing the opportunities with data. And that goes back to the previous point I was mentioning about really being a strategic partner, not just a service group. But yeah, it's interesting. It's about knowing personalities, and it's about it really does come back to just understanding the business and understanding the business problems and understanding what the person that you're talking to needs to accomplish, for their job and to be successful, and then making their success your own and trying to do that at scale.
Absolutely. It's kind of like when we talk about knowing the audience, this is essentially a hallmark of good communication that tends to get lost, especially in the data analytics world. And for example, you're not going to show Pride and Prejudice to someone who just watched Die Hard, because that you can tell that's not the kind of movie they want to watch. And this is exactly what you say about painting and a part of when you say you want to the projection, the image you want to project isn't one of like, okay, what service can we provide you, but actually, hey, we're an integral part of the business. How have you factored us into that? And reframing and recontextualizing that character is one of the hardest things that a lot of guys can do out there. And specifically, then just I mentioned communications, and I wanted to take a bit of a dive into the soft skills piece. So, how important do you think it is these soft skills are in the ability to build these relationships with these different stakeholders?
I think in terms of soft skills, in terms of sort of the communication side, the people management side of things, I would say I think it genuinely depends. It depends on who you're talking to. You're always going to have the soft skills, but it has to be nuanced to the stakeholder. I would not recommend that someone on my team or I go in and talk to a senior engineer in the same way that they're going in and talking to, say, a junior marketing analyst or a junior marketing channel manager or a senior marketing channel manager for that matter. What the communication style, the way that you approach individuals has to be nuanced to the individual, or failing that, at least to sort of the expertise and the way that they're going to see what needs to happen. So we run the gamut. I mean, I've got people on my team who are aligned to very technical groups. They spend a lot of time, basically passing code back and forward with notes in there, and everyone is very happy with that situation because that's what works for them. On the flip side, I've got other members of the team where, for one reason or another, most of their time is talking to non-technical resources, often outside our own company, and in that situation, we hire or we advance people with a strong emphasis on the ability to clearly communicate without getting into technical detail, because you're going to lose people, or even if you don't lose people, it's just not going to be the most efficient way to move the conversation forward. So as I look across the team, we have no cookie cutter way of approaching this. We look at the individuals, we look at the roles, we look at what is needed for that, and then we hire and promote to try and make sure that we're getting people with the right skills to meet the stakeholders where they are. Now, obviously, sometimes that's a little bit of backwards and forwards. Obviously, sometimes we have stakeholders where we try and work with them to find a slightly different common language, right? Because we're finding that, we're trying to explain ourselves and it's not quite going across, and we have to try and find a middle ground where, everyone can get on the same page. But again, if you look at the situation, if you look at the individuals you're in, you look at the personalities, I don't think it's rocket science. Like, you can look at it and you can say, well, this person is clearly a better fit for someone who wants to communicate on a technical level, and this is clearly a better fit for someone who wants to use the data but needs it more in a conversational style, or more coming from a sort of a hypothetical point of view. And we work with people where they are, effectively, or do our best to.
Yeah, and again, just tying that back into what you said earlier, knowing the audience as well. So specifically, you mentioned that a big thing that you guys are working on now is the key stakeholder engagement, or at least the team are. So just tying it back into yourself a bit, what role did these soft skills play in, for example, changing this key stakeholder behavior? And can you give some examples?
Yeah, I certainly can. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, so when I went to my new place way back, I mean, the company had about 110 people. The CEO, again, another data guy. As a junior analyst, I was reporting directly into the CEO, and at one point he said, I would have hired a CFO, but I realized that that would have just annoyed me because I want to do that anyway. So I'm going to do kind of the CFO stuff, and you're going to do all of the data and analytics stuff that I need to be able to do the CFO stuff, which basically meant that I was talking to everyone in the company, depending on what was needed, right? So I kind of got a trial by fire there. And what I found very, very quickly is that I couldn't communicate to everyone in the same way, not surprisingly. Right? Different things mean different things to different people. So I got kind of a trial by fire on that one and learned my way into it. I think as we've if we look at specific examples, how did we change, or how did we find different ways of working with individuals? I can give you a couple of specifics. So years ago, I was working with, several years ago now, I was working with the head of marketing change, from someone who was very, very numbers driven, very technical driven. He went on to do something else, and his replacement came from much more of a brand strategy background, much more of sort of like what is the image we're presenting to the world, and was not that she couldn't, she certainly could, but she didn't approach the topic of marketing in the same way. It wasn't about spreadsheets and about return on investment. It was about brand building and the creative aspects of things. Now, she had other people who were still doing that kind of thing, obviously, because she ran things properly. But in terms of the communication with her and thinking about, okay, where are we going, and what do we want to measure, and how do we want to measure it, the conversation had to effectively flip on a dime. What we did at that point is that rather, we had several conversations about that. We redefined kind of the KPIs and stuff that we wanted to keep an eye on. And it even led to organizational shifts where effectively I ramped up my marketing analytics branch of the team at that point to cover some of what the old CMO was doing, right? Take some of the weight off, but also to get into some of the topics that she was more interested in, including kind of more like impression measurement, TV ad spike measurement, etc., which was more, wouldn't necessarily immediately show up in the downstream data, but did show up if you looked at, sort of impression type measurement, sort of fluctuations in application usage. And that was a sea change in the way that that team was run, and in the way that we had to interact with them. A very different personality coming in, and we adjusted accordingly and shifted team members and team objectives around, both on her side and on my side, to accommodate. That's probably the biggest shift, an example that we've had for a while. But you do that on a daily basis, or we do that on a daily basis throughout the team.
And you mentioned this is your own personal experience. So how do you go about educating the wider organization? Well, actually, two questions there. So kind of, how do you educate the team on these values, your data team, and then how do you cascade that throughout the wider business, the whole data-driven, analytics-focused, data-centric stuff?
Yeah, I mean, part of this is definitely by example, and then I think a part of it as well is also making sure that the team know that that we're serious about this and that it's written into the objectives. So, partially, like I said, this is leading by example. So I try and make sure that I am visibly communicating with stakeholders. I chat certainly with my direct reports about how that goes and how, what that meant. Oh, I had this conversation. This is what it looked like. This is why, this is where we came to. These were the issues that we addressed, or this is the stuff that went well. And I encourage my direct reports to work with their direct reports in the same way, et cetera, down. The other thing we do, so it's a lot of lead by example, but then to reinforce the idea, within each of my team branches, and we can talk about the exact organizational structure if you want, but within each of my team branches, they have a set of semi-annual and annual objectives. We do check in on them regularly. We actually do CSAT measurement, which I think is relatively unusual for a business intelligence team, but we survey people on a regular basis, our stakeholders on a regular basis, asking for sort of their satisfaction levels. And that feeds back into the objectives, and all of the teams will have various themes of, are you setting up appropriate communication with your stakeholders? Do you have channels open? Do they know who to go to when they have a question? Are you seeing the same questions over and over again? Are you finding the right ways to talk to these individuals? Have you got anyone that's upset, right? And they literally have, as part of their objectives, to make sure that the stakeholders that they're working with are feeling satisfied, they can get answers to questions quickly, that we're doing the best we can to provide the tools. So if we need new tools or different engineering, that feedback is being passed along, right? That they're feeling that they're getting the data that they need, that they're getting the strategic input that they need. So it's literally written into the team's objectives, into our career ladder documents. that this is something that you need to be working on, that this is something that you are expected to focus on and to advance as you advance in your career within our organization.
So with that in mind, with the whole governance piece behind that, then are you like the data governor of the business? I mean, to reframe the question, like how would you characterize the role that you play within Rakuten?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I realized the other day I haven't had a job description that fits my job for, you know, nearly a decade at this point. So it's an interesting question. I think I definitely have a hand in data governance. Typically, when I describe my role, I would say that I oversee enterprise analytics and data science, right? So it's my responsibility to make sure that as best as we can, we're doing the analysis and the data science the best we can. I tend to describe myself as playing a product management role with respect to the data platform and tools in partnership with my extremely strong engineering team on the data side of things. And then and have done for years. And then, yeah, over the last couple of years, the data governance piece has definitely come in. So we don't actually have a CDO within the organization, but clearly data governance would typically be the realm of a CDO. So we work on the aspects of data governance in somewhat distributed fashion. There's a couple of us that really weigh in on that. We break it down in a fairly typical way, which is to do with, you know, sort of data access control, sort of compliance and security controls, and then data quality and data product quality controls. The data quality and data product quality tend to fall more on me. The security aspects and the compliance aspect tend to fall a little bit more on different groups. But yeah, that at this stage in our evolution, I would say I'm a major player in that, but we don't actually have one individual person who is sort of, we have executive kind of sponsor for data governance, but day to day, it's a very collaborative type of engagement with me and a couple of other people as senior leads in there.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're already quite rigorous with the whole actually building this analytical mindset from the ground up, right? You mentioned that it's actually in doctrine that you guys have to do that. There has to be like an element of trust with that though. So how important is the trust piece of that? And what do you think are some of the best ways to build and then facilitate that?
Yeah. So trust, yeah, there is no point in being an analyst if you're going to put information out that people don't trust or believe. I tend to think, and this is a little unfortunate, or it's going to sound unfortunate, but I tend to think about trust from a relatively negative perspective. I tend to think that our group has a relatively good reputation. I think in general, maybe not universally, but in general, there is an assumed degree of trust that we will probably get it right at this point. So it's really ours to lose. Now, we built that trust up through the years by being on top of it. Like, you know, I think a big thing about trust is being able to go in and anticipate questions from stakeholders or anticipate questions that are going to come down, anticipate the use case. And I'm not saying, you know more than everyone else in every situation, but like there are certain things where if I go in and I'll use my CFO, for example, because he's very, very good, as a lot of CFOs are, at drilling in and try and pressurize. Did people really understand this situation well enough before they came and asked me for, you know, whatever million, or, you know, before they claimed that this is going to completely alter all of our lives? It's a great reminder of a degree of scrutiny. I know that if I walk into certain meetings, he is going to, as he should do, that he's going to push on some of the numbers, and he's going to say, well, hold on, how do you know that? Are you sure about that? That doesn't look right. Being able to not guess every question that's going to come up, but being able to spot the likely questions and being ready with an answer and be able to say, yep, we already double checked that. Or, yep, no, we ran that by X, Y, and Z, and we double checked it this way, is probably the quickest and easiest way I've found to generate trust in an analytics group. It's about, no, we're seeing the same questions as you, and yes, that's a good question, and yes, we already looked at it, and yeah, this is right, or yeah, we verified this data, or yeah, you're right, this did look fishy, and guess what we found when we dug into it a little bit more? There's this weird spike going on, and yep, we need a week to go and investigate what it is and get it cleared up. So can we bump this meeting by a week? You know, and I think over time, if you do that repeatedly, it does build that degree of trust. It builds because really when you get down to it, what I would say trust in a business intelligence type environment means, at least, is that that person is willing to make decisions based on the data that is presented. And it's ultimately what it comes down to. If they believe that the data is as good as it's going to get, as good as they could get, then why not make a decision on it? If they are sitting there thinking, well, okay, but can I really trust this? Can I really base my decisions on this? Right? If there's a niggling lack of trust, they're not going to base their decisions on it, or they're probably not. In case you haven't got very far as an analyst or even a data scientist. And it translates also more into the data science world, where you're talking about direct consumer impact. I mean, a lot of the time we think about the split between, there's two kind of major use cases for data within an organization, right? One is to empower employee decision-making, ultimately, right? Whoever that may be, whether it's a small decision or a huge strategic decision, data should be ideally playing a role in helping people make decisions and make them quick, efficiently, and the right decision. The other part is literally altering your product. For Rakuten Rewards, the business group I work with, that's a B2C role, it's a B2B role. So we work with a whole bunch of big stores, we work with millions of consumers. How do we use data to alter your experience with us on both sides, right? So from the merchant point of view, can we bring data to the table that suggests strategic opportunities or things that could work better for you, or ways that our partnership can be better? For the consumer side, it's even more directly relevant. Like, can we actually show you in our application layers stuff that you're more interested in, or offer you better rates, or, anticipate a problem you may have, or put stuff that you may be interested in to the top of the list to really make the app perform better for you and be a better experience? That comes down to, frankly, the very same notion of trust. No product manager or engineering group who's worth working with is going to integrate a data-based consumer experience that they don't trust is going to work. Right? Like, they're not going to do that. Why would you? The closest you're going to get is, this seems like a long shot, we'll test it and see, and you do some kind of experiment. But if they're like, yeah, we really don't think this is going to work, they're not going to touch it. Why would they? It's a waste of time and effort. So even in that situation, it does come down to trust. Like, if you guys are giving me a result, can I trust that it does what it says and that it's being duly scrutinized? So yeah, trust, critical. And yeah, you build it slowly over time.
Almost the number one tenet to gain more influence in the business, right? And we've talked a lot about the great stuff that you're doing with the team and at Rakuten. I'd want to kind of get some of your hot takes on the wider industry. So how do you see data analytics today and the general progress of data-driven business transformation in the corporate world?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I do think we hit a sea change, I think, a couple of years ago when the distributed cloud providers, BigQuery, Snowflake, to some extent Redshift, really hit their stride. I mean, clearly people were using them before that, but I think in the last couple of years, at least from my vantage point, it seems like there's been a significant shift over there. The functionality has really matured. If you look, and the reason I think that that's such a big shift is if you look 4 or 5 years ago, we were fighting with Hadoop clusters. That wasn't so much fun. If you look even further back than that, we were dealing with, giant SQL Server instances and running out of capacity. And I would say a significant percentage of my job, all of the analysts and the data scientists that were working for me at the point, our job was working around the technology. Right. So the technology was kind of like this thing that could break. It often did because of capacity limitations. You had to be very careful about what you did. The data was probably shoved in all kinds of different silos, and you spent half your time just figuring out where the data was, how you get it, and then merging it back together. With the big cloud providers really hitting their stride and really hitting scale, I don't have to worry about the technology anymore. right? I still hold the contracts, but that's basically the only time I worry about the technology. These things don't break anymore. Like, or I don't have to worry. I mean, we're on Snowflake, but you could make the same argument for BigQuery, that if I want to run something, I can run it. It's going to run. Like these things are incredibly stable, and I don't have to worry that it's going to break. I can isolate workloads. I don't have to worry that, you know, oh no, my marketing team's about to take down all of my finance reporting. No, I just sit them on different clusters. Not a problem anymore. It becomes purely a function of cost, which, yeah, you do have to worry about that, but that's more of sort of like a management and a rationalization thing. It's not like it isn't a technical thing in the same way. So I think what that's allowed us to do over the last couple of years is the technology has got out of the way. From the analytics and data science point of view, you can now do whatever you want to do. And it's put much more of an emphasis on what should I be doing, not what can I do. And I think that's a sea change. It genuinely is a sea change. Like if I look 4 years ago, the conversation often went, okay, well, what do I want to do? Okay, I can't do that. So what can I do which closely approximates what I actually want to do? Today, if the data's been collected, I can do whatever I want to do. Right. So that's a material difference. It introduces its own challenges. I mean, cost management is definitely one. You can get runaway costs on this. We've spent not a small amount of time sort of thinking through how we want to do cost management. The other thing that I'm seeing, and I think there are vendors popping up in the space that are really thinking about this as well, is it's almost too easy now. If you think of data products as, you know, any kind of table or report, right, that, you know, could provide data to the organization or answer a question. We have got a mass proliferation of data products in a way that, like, at a scale that was sort of unimaginable previously. Why? Well, because the hardware isn't a problem anymore. It's very, very easy for us to spin up. Here's a new derived table. Here's a new data point. Here's a new report, and the hardware just sort of absorbs it. And as long as you're not doing crazy kind of updates or dealing with IoT data, the cost just to do sort of one more select statement, even over billions of rows or trillions of rows, isn't actually that much. So we're just seeing this massive explosion in terms of individual data products, which is good, but it does raise some interesting questions about how do you manage all of those data products, right? Like, how do you know that people aren't just recreating the wheel over and over again, because it's relatively easy to recreate the wheel at this point? Well, I know for a fact that we are doing, which isn't actually super efficient. And things like, you know, privacy control. How do you make sure that you are not having, you know, PII data or personal information sort of stuck in a table somewhere that is not controlled and monitored? How do you make sure that the data products are high quality, right? That people have put the right filters on the report, or you know, considering the right where clauses, or doing all the right joins as they're creating these reports? Because we made it so easy for people to do this kind of work, right? That you don't have to be a specialist necessarily to produce data products anymore. So how do you maintain data quality in this environment? And I think that's where I'm seeing a lot of growth, right? And where I think there will be the growth over the next couple of years is in data product use and management. How do you catalog these things? How do you look at the lineage of these things? How do you assess quality of these things? How do you rationalize down what you're building? How do you control it? How do you get visibility for these things in an environment where, you know, we're generating literally hundreds and hundreds of Tableau reports a month? Like, how do you allow people to find the one that is relevant and is credible and whatever else? And there's been, you know, these aren't exactly new thoughts. I just think that they are becoming more pressing as these cloud technologies are coming in, because organizations like mine, we can now spin data products up all day, every day, with virtually no overhead. So in a way that we couldn't before. So these issues are becoming a lot more pressing, and I think that this is going to be a much more significant part of the conversation over the next couple of years as we move forward.
Mm.
I know from my point of view, when I spend time looking at data platform components and so on, this is definitely a key focus for my longer term strategic thought lines.
Mm. Super interesting. Well, Mark, some great insights there. Great to hear more about what you're working on, Rakuten, and some of your takes as well. One last question. What advice would you give for aspiring data and analytics leaders today?
I think that's a really good question. I think we've touched on a couple of key pieces on it. You're only going to be as good as the relationships that you have with the business or with the groups that you're trying to support. I mean, sometimes we talk about a 3-tier model, right? Which is the data platform, it's the data products, and the data use. And I like to think about things in that way. And one of the things we talk about a lot within our team is that you need all three. You can have the greatest data platform ever designed, all on the brand new tech. If all of the data products built on top of it, all the tables and reports are junk, they're badly designed, they're not useful, they fail all the time for whatever reason, then it doesn't matter how good your data platform is, right? If you've got a great data platform and you've got great data products and no one knows how to use them, if no one trusts the data, even though it's totally valid, if the business stakeholders, the people who actually have to make day-to-day decisions based on the data, can't find the stuff, don't know where it is, don't know how to use it, don't really trust it, again, you can have the greatest data platform and the greatest data products on the face of the planet, and it's going to make virtually no difference to anything. So you have to consider all three. I think the thing that often does get lost is that final tier, the data use. And you do hear people talking about data literacy. I hate that term. I think it sounds super pejorative. I prefer data savviness or something. But anyway, the notion of, can people use data, right? I fairly strongly believe that as an analytics lead, that's kind of your responsibility, right? And you have to take it seriously. A lot of people do not really come into their roles knowing how to make decisions based on data. It isn't something that is a core part of our education for most people. There may be people who are very numerically competent, but they may not really have or engineering or really understand the engineering side, but they may not know how to contextualize decision making, even if they're numerically very savvy. You may have other people who know the business side of things, can make the decisions, but don't really understand how to look at data, or how to interpret data, or how to sort of draw implications out of the data. And if your stakeholders can't make decisions based on data, you're rapidly going nowhere. So that would be, you need to have a good data platform. Often analysts will defer that to the engineers. I say, no, that has to be collaborative. If it's not working for you, then you need to talk to the engineers, and you need to find a way to get a platform that will work, right, for analytics and for data science. You need great data products. Don't just throw report after report after report out there. Really think about how can I produce one table that is going to be really strong and really provide trustworthy, reliable information for a raft of questions. And then you have to emphasize the stakeholder relationships. You have to meet them where they are. You have to understand what would it take for this individual or this group of individuals to use data to make decisions on a day-to-day basis. And by extension, can we get them that data? But I would say really focus on those. For an analytics leader today, really focus on those three things. Really think about who your stakeholders are, because there's very few analytics roles where you are the business stakeholder, where what you decide based on the data is going to be the decision. It's all about influence for most. Not universally true, but for most analytics leaders, that's going to be most of their time. So if you're neglecting that piece, you're undermining your own success.
That was a great end to a great podcast, Mark. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be in touch soon.
Absolutely, no problem at all. Thanks for the opportunity.